The call came while I was standing in the hospital cafeteria, my coffee growing cold between my trembling hands. The screen illuminated with a name I hadn't expected to see: Jessica. My father's wife of 5 years, a woman who'd made it clear from our first meeting that she considered me an inconvenience rather than family. I almost declined the call, but something, intuition perhaps, made me answer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor. Jessica's voice was crisp and businesslike, lacking any trace of the panic I'd expect from someone whose husband had just suffered a massive stroke. I need you to sign some papers transferring your father's business holdings. The doctors say he might not recover, and we need to protect his assets. The hospital corridor seemed to tilt beneath my feet as her words registered. My father, Robert, had been admitted just 12 hours earlier after collapsing during his morning run. The neurologists were still running tests, still speaking in cautious terms about brain damage and recovery timelines. And here was Jessica, already dividing up his empire. "Jessica, Dad's still in critical condition," I replied, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "I'm focused on his medical care right now. Business matters can wait." The silence that followed was weighted with tension before she responded, her tone sharpening like a blade being drawn. "The business can't wait, Eleanor, and if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure you never see your father again. I control who visits him now." A strange heat spread through my chest as 5 years of thinly veiled hostility crystallized in that single cruel ultimatum. The weight of Jessica's manipulations, a burden I'd carried since my father had brought her home from that fateful Caribbean cruise, suddenly felt insignificant compared to the machines keeping my father alive 3 floors above us. "Dad might not survive, Jessica," I said, my words hanging in the antiseptic air. "Family loyalty is a two-way street," she replied, ice-coating each syllable. "If you don't show up at the lawyer's office tomorrow, don't expect to be welcome in Robert's hospital room anymore." My name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm 32 and the CFO of my father's construction company. This is the story of how I finally stood up to the woman who tried to erase me from my father's life, and how a document signed 3 years earlier would change everything. For months before Dad's stroke, I'd noticed the growing distance between us. The weekly dinners became monthly, then sporadic. My calls went to voicemail more often than not. Jessica was always there, hovering in the background of our conversations, steering him away from topics that involved me or our shared past. Before Jessica, Dad and I had been inseparable, especially after Mom died from breast cancer when I was 22. We'd grieved together, then rebuilt our lives side by side, growing his modest construction business into a regional powerhouse. But Jessica had changed everything. She'd appeared in his life like a perfectly timed coincidence. A divorced art dealer seated next to him on a flight to Jamaica, where he was attending a builders' conference. By the time they returned, she'd somehow convinced him that at 62, he needed to live a little, before it was too late. Their whirlwind romance left everyone in our circle with emotional whiplash, none more than me. "Your father deserves happiness," friends would say when they saw my concern. "Jessica makes him happy." But what they didn't see were the subtle ways she isolated him, criticized his close relationship with me, questioned his business decisions, especially those that involved my increasing role in the company. I tried anyway, inviting them to dinners, sending thoughtful gifts, swallowing my pride when Jessica would accidentally schedule competing events when Dad and I had plans. I maintained a professional demeanor at work, excelling in my role as CFO despite Jessica's attempts to undermine me with the board. "Nepotism is such an ugly business practice," she'd once remarked loudly at a company fundraiser, crystal champagne flute delicately poised between manicured fingers. "Don't you think qualified candidates should earn their positions, Robert?" Dad had looked uncomfortable, caught between his wife and daughter. "Eleanor has an MBA from Wharton and increased our profit margins by 30% last quarter," he'd replied, patting my hand. "I'd say she's more than qualified." Jessica's smile had tightened, but she'd retreated temporarily. That was her pattern: strategic retreats followed by flanking maneuvers. I balanced it all. The grief of watching my relationship with my father erode, the strain of maintaining my professional composure when Jessica attended board meetings as Dad's advisor, the constant vigilance required to protect both Dad and the company from her more questionable suggestions. No one needed that kind of family until the day Dad's morning run ended with a collapse on the trail and my vibrant, strong father became a still form in the neurological intensive care unit. The first 12 hours passed in a blur of surgeon updates and terrifying medical terminology. I'd been the one to receive the call from the paramedics since I was listed as Dad's emergency contact, something Jessica had apparently tried and failed to change. I'd called her immediately, my voice shaking as I explained what happened. "I'll be there as soon as I can," she'd said, her tone oddly flat. "I need to change and call some people first." I'd arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes to find Dad already in surgery, a blood clot being removed from his brain as doctors fought to minimize the damage. 3 hours later, Jessica finally appeared, dressed immaculately in a cream pantsuit that seemed more appropriate for a business lunch than a hospital vigil, not a hair out of place. "Have they said anything about recovery timelines?" were her first words, not "how is he" or "what happened." I'd explained what the neurosurgeon had told me, that the next 72 hours would be critical, that they wouldn't know the extent of the damage until Dad regained consciousness, if he regained consciousness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica had nodded briskly, pulled out her phone and stepped away to make calls, leaving me alone in the waiting room. When the doctor finally appeared to tell us they'd successfully removed the clot but Dad remained in critical condition, I'd broken down in tears, while Jessica had immediately asked about advance directives and whether Robert had indicated his wishes regarding, quote, extraordinary measures. I curled into the recliner beside Dad's bed that night, refusing to leave as nurses adjusted ventilator settings and checked pupillary responses. Jessica had departed around 8 p.m., citing a charity commitment she couldn't miss. "There's nothing to be done tonight anyway," she'd said with a dismissive wave toward Dad's unconscious form. "The staff will call if anything changes." I talked constantly to my unconscious father, reminiscing about fishing trips and work triumphs, afraid silence might let him slip away. I recalled the day he'd taught me to read blueprints, his large hands steady as they traced lines across the paper. "This is our legacy, Ellie," he'd said, using the nickname that had fallen away as I'd grown into my professional role. "Not just buildings, but creating spaces where people live their lives. Never forget what we're really building." Those words had shaped my approach to both business and life. By morning, Dad's neurologist delivered cautious optimism. "The swelling is reducing. His vital signs are stabilizing. These are good indicators, but we're still in wait-and-see territory." Hope flickered like a fragile flame, and I allowed myself to doze in the chair, exhaustion finally overtaking anxiety. That's when my phone had buzzed with Jessica's call about the business transfers. Standing in that hospital cafeteria, her ultimatum hanging between us, something inside me finally broke free. 10 years of seeking Dad's approval in the corporate world, 5 years of making excuses for Jessica's coldness, of believing I could eventually win her over with competence and patience. "I choose Dad," I said, my voice suddenly calm and unshakable. "And I'll be speaking with our corporate attorney about any paperwork you're trying to push through. Goodbye, Jessica." I hung up, my hands still trembling but now with resolve rather than fear. I walked back to Dad's room, a strange peace settling over me despite the chaos. "Everything okay?" asked Michael, the day nurse who'd been checking Dad's vitals when I'd stepped out for coffee. "Not really," I admitted. "But I'm exactly where I need to be." The monitors beeped steadily as doubt crept in. Was I making the right choice confronting Jessica now? Dad would hate conflict between us, especially while he was unable to mediate. The weight of potentially making his condition worse with family drama felt suddenly crushing. My phone buzzed again. Jessica, this time with a text. "Your father made me promise to protect his interests if anything happened to him. Don't make this difficult, Eleanor. The meeting is at 2 p.m. tomorrow at Greenberg's office." I stared at the screen, something about her wording triggering an old memory. 3 years earlier, after a close friend had suffered a similar health crisis, Dad had called me into his office one evening after everyone else had gone home. "I've been thinking about contingency planning," he'd said, unusually serious. "If something happens to me, there needs to be a clear chain of command, both for the family and the business." He'd slid a manila envelope across his desk. "This is a medical power of attorney, naming you as my healthcare proxy, along with a durable power of attorney for business matters. There's also a letter explaining my wishes." When I'd started to protest, uncomfortable discussing his mortality, he'd raised his hand. "This isn't about dying, Ellie. It's about making sure the right people are in charge if I can't be. Jessica means well, but she doesn't understand our business or what matters to me about healthcare. You do." I'd filed the documents in my personal safe, hoping they'd never be needed, and honestly, I'd nearly forgotten about them in the day-to-day rush of business and the ongoing navigation of family dynamics. But now, with Jessica's text glowing on my screen, the memory crystallized with perfect clarity. As evening fell, I was helping the physical therapist move Dad's limbs when his fingers twitched in my hand. "Michael," I gasped. "Did you see that?" The nurse checked the monitors, confirming increased brain activity. "Dad, it's Eleanor," I whispered, leaning close. His eyelids fluttered, then opened briefly, unfocused, but undeniably conscious. Tears streamed down my face as Dr. Patel rushed in, confirming Dad was showing signs of emerging from the worst. "It's gradual," she cautioned, "but this is a positive development." Hope overwhelmed me, a tangible thing expanding in my chest. While Jessica was presumably preparing for her lawyer meeting, I was witnessing the first promising signs of Dad's recovery. That night I drove home for the first time since the stroke, showered, changed clothes, and went straight to my safe. The manila envelope was there, the papers inside exactly as I remembered. The power of attorney was comprehensive, legally binding, and crystal clear. In the event of Robert Walsh's incapacitation, Eleanor Walsh would have full decision-making authority over both his medical care and business affairs. There was also a sealed letter addressed to me in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I broke the seal with trembling fingers. "Ellie," it began, "if you're reading this, something's happened to me. I need you to know that I trust you implicitly with both my life and our company. You've always had clarity of vision and strength of character, qualities your mother and I cherished in you. Jessica came into my life during a lonely time, and she's brought companionship I didn't know I needed. But I'm not blind to her limitations or her ambitions. The power I've granted you supersedes any influence she might attempt to wield. Protect what we've built, but most importantly, protect yourself and your place in the world we've created together. All my love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words, before carefully returning it to the envelope. Then I called our corporate attorney, Gregory Wheaton, who had been with Walsh Construction since before I was born. "Jessica has scheduled a meeting with Malcolm Greenberg tomorrow about transferring Dad's business holdings." I explained after filling him in on Dad's condition. She implied Dad wanted this. Greg's response was immediate and firm. "That's impossible. Your father and I reviewed his estate plan just 2 months ago. He was explicit about you retaining controlling interest in the company regardless of circumstances. And Malcolm Greenberg isn't our firm's attorney. He handles Jessica's personal matters." "I have Dad's power of attorney documents here," I said. "How quickly can we file them officially and notify all relevant parties?" "I can have everything processed by 9 a.m., Greg replied. "Eleanor, Jessica has no legal standing to transfer any assets without your approval while your father is incapacitated. The documents you hold make that absolutely clear." A weight lifted from my shoulders. Not all of it. Not while Dad still lay in ICU, but enough to breathe more easily. "Thank you, Greg. Can you also prepare a formal notification for Jessica? I think it's time for complete transparency." The following morning, I returned to the hospital with renewed purpose. Dad had continued showing signs of improvement overnight, responding to simple commands, squeezing fingers on request, though still unable to speak around his breathing tube. Dr. Patel was cautiously optimistic. "The brain is remarkable in its ability to rewire and recover," she explained. "Your father is showing good early indicators, but recovery from a stroke of this magnitude is a marathon, not a sprint. We're talking months of therapy, potentially some permanent deficits. Whatever he needs, I promised." I'm here for the duration. I was helping Dad sip water through a straw, the breathing tube now removed, when Jessica stormed into the room, her face a mask of controlled fury. "What have you done?" she demanded, brandishing papers that I recognized as Greg's formal notification. Dad's eyes darted between us, confusion clouding his features. "Let's talk outside," I said calmly, squeezing Dad's hand reassuringly before following Jessica into the hallway. Once the door closed behind us, she unleashed her anger. "You went behind my back with some ancient paperwork. Robert and I had an understanding about how things would be handled." "Really?" "Because Dad's letter to me suggests otherwise," I replied, keeping my voice level. "The power of attorney isn't ancient. It's legally binding and was reaffirmed in his estate planning 2 months ago." "Greg confirmed that." "Greg is loyal to you because you've worked with him daily for years," she snapped. "Robert and I had private conversations about his wishes." I stepped closer, no longer intimidated by her presence or her threats. "Dad is showing signs of recovery, Jessica. That's what matters right now, not business holdings or asset transfers. If you want to be part of his recovery, you need to focus on his health, not his wealth." Her perfectly composed facade cracked slightly, revealing something I hadn't expected to see: fear. Not fear for Dad's health, I realized with sudden clarity, but fear for her position, her security, her status. I almost felt sorry for her. "You can see him," I said, softening slightly. "But there will be no business discussions in his room, no paperwork, no stress. His recovery comes first. And just so we're completely clear, I am now legally responsible for all decisions regarding both his medical care and business affairs until he's able to resume control himself. Any attempts to circumvent that will be met with legal consequences." Jessica's expression hardened again, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "This isn't over, Eleanor. Robert wouldn't want his company in the hands of someone so inexperienced with the real business world." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "Jessica, I've been helping run that company since I was in college. Dad and I built it together. What exactly is your business experience again?" "Art dealing and..." "What was it you did before that?" "Hospitality management?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," I replied, "I think for the first time I understand exactly who I'm dealing with. You can see Dad now if you'd like. 5 minutes, and I'll be right outside the door." As Jessica brushed past me into Dad's room, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted but oddly exhilarated. For 5 years, I'd been walking on eggshells around this woman, trying to preserve my relationship with Dad by accommodating her increasing demands and territorial behavior. In less than 48 hours, everything had changed, not just Dad's health crisis, but my own internal landscape. The power of attorney gave me legal authority, yes. But something more profound had shifted inside me, the realization that I didn't need anyone's permission to protect what mattered. Not Jessica's, not the board's, not even Dad's. I had found my own authority, independent of documents or titles. As I watched through the door's window, Jessica perched awkwardly at Dad's bedside, clearly uncomfortable with his weakened state, uncertain how to interact with him now that he was conscious but unable to speak clearly. Their relationship had always been built on his vigor, his success, his personality. This vulnerable version of Robert Walsh clearly wasn't what she had signed up for. After precisely 5 minutes, I re-entered the room. Jessica stood immediately, making a show of kissing Dad's forehead before straightening her designer jacket. "I'll be back tomorrow, darling," she promised, though her eyes slid away from his searching gaze. "I need to handle some matters at home." Once she'd gone, Dad's hand fumbled for mine, his grip weak but determined. He struggled to form words, frustration evident in his expression. "Jess, papers?" He managed, finally, the question clear despite his impaired speech. "It's handled, Dad," I assured him, squeezing his hand gently. "Everything's taken care of. The company is secure, and your health is our only priority right now." The relief in his eyes was unmistakable, and in that moment, I knew. He had been aware of Jessica's nature all along, not blind to her ambitions as I'd feared, but perhaps hoping her better qualities would eventually overcome the worse ones. Love was complicated that way, capable of inspiring both wisdom and willful blindness in equal measure. "Rest now," I told him, smoothing back the silver hair from his forehead. "I'll be here when you wake up, and tomorrow, and the day after that. As long as it takes." As Dad drifted back to sleep, I settled into the now familiar hospital chair, my laptop open to company reports that needed reviewing. The path ahead would be challenging, managing Dad's recovery, running the company in his absence, and navigating the new reality with Jessica. But for the first time in years, I felt equal to the challenge. The power of attorney had given me legal authority, but the real power had come from within, the courage to stand up for what mattered, to choose truth over accommodation, to finally become the person Dad had always believed I could be. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm of hospital visits, physical therapy sessions, and late nights at the office. Dad's recovery progressed in fits and starts, triumphant moments when he stood unassisted for the first time, followed by crushing setbacks when aphasia left him frustrated and unable to communicate his simplest needs. Through it all, I divided myself between his hospital room and the company boardroom, determined that neither would suffer in his absence. Jessica made sporadic appearances, always immaculately dressed, always with an audience of nurses or doctors present, performing the role of devoted wife with theatrical precision. But she never stayed longer than 30 minutes, always finding reasons to leave before the hard parts, the therapy sessions, the doctor consultations, the moments when Dad's frustration erupted into tears. "He wouldn't want me to see him like this," she explained when I confronted her about her absences. "Robert values his dignity." She said this while examining her manicure, not meeting my eyes. "Recovery isn't dignified," I replied, exhaustion making my words sharper than intended. "It's messy and painful and real. That's what marriage is about, being there for the messy parts, not just the galas and vacations." Her eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Don't presume to lecture me about marriage, Eleanor. You've never even managed a long-term relationship." The barb stung because it contained a kernel of truth. At 32, my longest relationship had lasted just under 2 years, eventually crumbling under the weight of my dedication to the company. But I refused to let her see she'd scored a hit. "I'm not talking about relationships in general, Jessica. I'm talking about your specific commitment to my father. A commitment that seems to waver now that he actually needs support." She gathered her designer handbag, effectively ending the conversation. "I have my own way of supporting Robert. The stress of watching his deterioration isn't helpful to either of us." As she clicked away on Italian leather heels, I wondered if Dad had always known this side of her existed, if he'd accepted it as a reasonable trade-off for her companionship, or if he'd truly been blinded by love and loneliness. 3 weeks after the stroke, Dad was transferred to a rehabilitation facility, specializing in neurological recovery. His speech was returning slowly, certain words still frustratingly beyond reach, and the right side of his body remained weaker than the left. But his cognition was largely intact. A miracle, according to Dr. Patel. "Your father's recovery is already exceeding expectations," she told me during our final consultation before the transfer. "His determination is remarkable." "He's always been stubborn," I replied with a watery smile. "Once he sets his mind to something, there's no stopping him." The rehabilitation center resembled an upscale hotel more than a medical facility, with private rooms, a state-of-the-art gym, and gardens designed for both relaxation and mobility practice. The $2,000 daily fee not covered by insurance made me grateful for the company's success and the comprehensive health coverage Dad had insisted on for all employees, himself included. On the day of the transfer, I arrived early to ensure everything was prepared. Walking through the sunlit atrium, I collided with someone rounding a corner, a tall man with prematurely silver hair and the kind of face that looked perpetually amused. "Whoa there," he said, steadying me with a hand on my elbow. "You okay?" "Fine. Just distracted," I replied, already moving to step around him. "You must be Eleanor Walsh," he said, stopping me in my tracks. "I'm Dr. Connor Mitchell. I'll be overseeing your father's rehabilitation program." I looked up, really seeing him for the first time. The intelligent green eyes, the smile lines suggesting someone who laughed easily. the air of competence that immediately put me at ease. "How did you know who I am?" I asked, extending my hand professionally. He shook it, his grip firm but not overpowering. "I make it a point to know who's who in my patients' support systems. You're described in your father's intake forms as primary caregiver, daughter, and business partner. 3 vital roles." "All roles I take seriously," I said, surprised by his thoroughness. "I can see that," he replied, his tone warm rather than judgmental. "But I should warn you. Part of my job is making sure caregivers don't burn themselves out. You look like you haven't had a full night's sleep in weeks." I laughed, despite myself. "Is that your professional assessment, Dr. Mitchell?" "Connor, please." "And yes, identifying exhaustion is well within my expertise." His smile faded into something more serious. "Your father's recovery will be measured in months, not days. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Pace yourself accordingly." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from the transport team. They were 10 minutes out with Dad. "I need to go," I said, already moving toward the entrance. "We'll talk more later," Connor called after me. "About sustainable caregiving strategies." "Looking forward to it," I replied automatically, though strangely, I realized I meant it. Dad's transition to the rehabilitation center went smoothly, his face lighting up at the private room with large windows overlooking the gardens. "Better view than hospital," he managed, the words coming slowly but clearly. "Much better," I agreed, arranging his few personal items, a framed photo of Mom, his e-reader loaded with business books and mysteries, the hand-knit throw from his executive assistant that had appeared mysteriously in his hospital room the day after his stroke. "Company?" he asked, the single word encompassing a multitude of concerns. "Everything's running smoothly," I assured him. "The Westbrook project is ahead of schedule, the quarterly projections look strong, and the board is fully supportive of your recovery timeline." I didn't mention the 2 board members who had aligned themselves with Jessica, questioning my temporary leadership at every turn. Those were problems I could handle without adding to his worries. He nodded, satisfied for now, though I knew the simplified updates wouldn't satisfy him for long. Dad had built Walsh Construction from a small residential contractor to a regional commercial powerhouse through relentless attention to detail and strategic vision. Being sidelined during a critical growth period was its own kind of torture for him. "Jessica?" he asked next, his expression carefully neutral. I chose my words with equal care. "She visits when she can. She's been busy with the charity gala planning." This was technically true, though the gala in question wasn't for another 6 months. Dad's eyes, always perceptive, held mine for a long moment. "Truth," he said simply. I sighed, sitting on the edge of his bed. "She's struggling with your condition, Dad. She makes appearances but doesn't stay long. She's uncomfortable with—" I gestured vaguely, encompassing his weakened state, the rehabilitation facility, the entirety of our new reality. He nodded slowly, unsurprised. "Expected," he said after a moment, a wealth of understanding in that single word. "Always surface with her." "Then why?" I began, but he cut me off with a raised hand. "Companionship," he said. "After your mother, loneliness." Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. But he pushed on, determined to make me understand. Knew what she was. Accepted limits. My throat tightened at the resignation in his voice. "You deserve more than limits, Dad." He smiled then, a shadow of his old wry grin, "Like you. Giving everything to company. We all make choices." The comparison landed like a gentle rebuke, forcing me to examine my own life choices with the same clarity I'd been judging Jessica's. Dad was right. I'd chosen the company over personal relationships repeatedly, prioritizing professional success over emotional connection. The only difference was that my dedication benefited our shared vision, while Jessica's self-interest threatened it. The conversation ended there as Connor arrived with the rehabilitation team for Dad's initial assessment, but his words lingered in my mind throughout the day. That evening, returning to my empty condo with takeout I was too tired to eat, I found myself staring at Dad's letter again, the one from the power of attorney envelope. Protect what we've built, but most importantly, protect yourself and your place in the world we've created together. What exactly was my place in the world? CFO by day, exhausted caregiver by evening, occasional dinner date when some well-meaning friends set me up with the perfect guy who inevitably found my work schedule and family commitments too demanding. Was I really so different from Jessica, defining myself through external validation and achievement rather than authentic connection? The question haunted me as days stretched into weeks. Dad's progress at the rehabilitation center was steady, his speech improving, his right side weakness diminishing through dedicated therapy. Connor Drive. Mitchell professionally, though he'd insisted on first names during our increasingly frequent conversations, had integrated me into Dad's rehabilitation program, teaching me exercises to continue at home and strategies for supporting recovery without enabling dependence. "You have good instincts," he told me after observing a therapy session where I'd encouraged Dad through a particularly challenging set of exercises. "You know when to push and when to back off." "Years of construction project management," I replied with a tired smile. "Knowing when to push contractors and when to give them space is basically my job description." "I meant it as a compliment," he said, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "Most family members either hover too much or disengage completely. You've found the balance." His praise warmed me in unexpected ways, as did his consistent efforts to check on my well-being, not just Dad's. "How are you sleeping?" became his standard greeting, followed by practical suggestions when my answer revealed ongoing exhaustion. Sometimes it was a recommendation for a meal delivery service to simplify my evenings. Other times, insistence that I take a full weekend off while he personally oversaw Dad's therapy schedule. Jessica's visits grew increasingly rare as Dad's condition improved, her excuses more elaborate. When she did appear, it was always with an audience, always with designer shopping bags containing extravagant but impractical gifts. Italian loafers Dad couldn't yet manage with his limited dexterity, rare wines he couldn't drink with his medications. 6 weeks after the stroke, I arrived at the rehabilitation center to find Dad sitting in the garden with Connor, both men laughing at something. The sound of Dad's laughter, still slightly halting but unmistakably genuine, stopped me in my tracks. It had been so long since I'd heard that sound that tears sprang to my eyes before I could control them. "Eleanor," Dad called, spotting me. Connor was just telling me about his disaster date last weekend. His speech was slower than before the stroke, but increasingly fluid, the words finding their way with less effort each day. "The woman brought her mother along," Connor explained, standing to offer me his chair. "Didn't mention it until we were seated at the restaurant. Said she needed a second opinion before deciding if I was worth a follow-up date." "What was the verdict?" I asked, accepting the seat with a grateful smile. "Mom approved. Daughter didn't," he replied with a theatrical wince. "Apparently my profession suggests I'm too nurturing to be exciting long-term." Dad snorted. "Ridiculous. Best qualities in a man." The simple statement, delivered with fatherly certainty, made Connor's ears redden slightly. "High praise from Robert Walsh," he said, nodding toward a second bench. "Mind if I join you both? I have some updates on your father's progress." The news was overwhelmingly positive. Dad was advancing through his therapy milestones ahead of schedule. His cognitive functions testing at pre-stroke levels. His speech expected to continue improving with ongoing therapy. Most significantly, Connor believed Dad could transition to outpatient rehabilitation within 2 weeks, returning home with part-time in-home assistance. "Home," Dad repeated, the word loaded with emotion. "My own bed, my office." "Limited office hours," Connor cautioned. "We're talking half days maximum, with mandatory rest periods." "Your brain is still healing, Robert," Dad grumbled good-naturedly, but I could see the spark in his eyes at the prospect of returning to some version of normal life. "Eleanor has been managing everything. Time I got back to work." "Dad, there's no rush," I said. "The company is stable, and you need to focus on recovery." Speaking of which, Connor interjected, I'd like to discuss the home care arrangements. Eleanor, do you have time to review some options this afternoon? There are several services I recommend, depending on Robert's specific needs and home layout. We arranged to meet after Dad's afternoon therapy session, and I spent the intervening hours calling our home maintenance team to prepare Dad's house for his return, installing grab bars in the bathrooms, ensuring pathways were clear of potential tripping hazards, rearranging his bedroom to accommodate potential mobility equipment. When I returned to Connor's office later, I found him reviewing Dad's files, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as I entered, his expression clearing into a smile. Perfect timing, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I've narrowed down the home care options to 3 services that I think would work well for your father's situation. As he walked me through the different agencies, their specialties, and cost structures, I found myself studying him with new awareness. Connor Mitchell wasn't just good at his job, he genuinely cared about his patients' outcomes. He remembered details about Dad's preferences and personality that informed his recommendations, demonstrating an attention to the human elements of recovery that went beyond medical protocols. You're staring, he said suddenly, interrupting his own explanation of physical therapy equipment. Do I have something on my face? No, sorry, I said, embarrassed at being caught. I was just thinking that Dad's been lucky to have you overseeing his case. You've made a difficult situation much more manageable for both of us. That's literally my job description, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. But thank you. Your father is an exceptional man, and he's fortunate to have you fighting in his corner. He hesitated, then added, not everyone has that kind of support system. Speaking of support systems, I said, seizing the opening, there's something I should probably explain about our family situation before Dad comes home. His wife Jessica, the one who visits for precisely 17 minutes every 10 days? Connor interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. I couldn't help but laugh at the accuracy of his assessment. You've noticed. It's my job to notice family dynamics, he said. They impact recovery outcomes significantly. So I told him about Jessica's initial attempts to seize control of Dad's business interests, about the power of attorney that had blocked her efforts, about her increasing distance as Dad's recovery revealed he might never fully return to the vigorous, commanding figure she'd married. Connor listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, considering his response. Recovery often reveals the true nature of relationships, he said finally. Crisis strips away pretense. Some people rise to the occasion, others retreat when faced with difficult realities. He paused, meeting my gaze directly. You've risen admirably, Eleanor, but I'm concerned about what happens when your father returns home. Will Jessica be living there? How will that dynamic affect his recovery environment? It was a question I'd been avoiding, unsure of my place in determining my father's living arrangements with his own wife. I don't know, I admitted. She's been staying at their house but visiting less and less. I'm not sure she's prepared for the realities of at-home recovery care. You need to have that conversation before discharge, Connor advised. Recovery environments need to be stable, supportive, and as stress-free as possible. Tension between caregivers can significantly impede progress. I'm not sure how to approach that conversation without overstepping, I said. Their marriage is their business, regardless of my concerns about Jessica's commitment. Connor's expression softened. Start by talking to your father. He's cognitively intact and has the right to determine his own living situation. He may have already given this considerable thought. His advice was sound, of course, but the prospect of broaching such a delicate subject with Dad felt daunting. Our relationship had always been closest in the context of business, strategic decisions, financial projections, project management. Personal matters, especially since Mom's death, had largely remained in the realm of the unspoken. Thank you, I said, gathering my notes on the home care options. For everything, not just the medical guidance. You've made this whole process more human somehow. Highest compliment a doctor can receive, he replied, standing as I did. Will you be at physical therapy tomorrow? I'd like to show you some of the exercises your father should continue at home. I'll be there, I promised, suddenly looking forward to the session for reasons that had little to do with rehabilitation protocols. The following day, Jessica made one of her rare appearances, arriving during Dad's lunch hour with a florist's worth of arrangements for his room, and news that she'd been featured in a regional lifestyle magazine's Women of Influence issue. They interviewed me about the challenges of supporting a spouse through health crises, she explained, positioning the largest arrangement, an ostentatious display of exotic blooms, on Dad's bedside table. They're calling me an inspiration to caregivers everywhere. Dad caught my eye across the room, his expression a mixture of resignation and amusement that nearly broke my composure. Congratulations, he said mildly. Good publicity for your charity work. Exactly, she agreed, missing or ignoring the subtle irony in his tone. The gala committee was thrilled with the exposure. Ticket sales have increased 15% since the article was published. She stayed precisely 18 minutes, filling the time with society gossip and updates on friends Dad hadn't seen since his stroke, never once asking about his recovery progress or plans for returning home. As she air-kissed him goodbye, promising to return very soon, Dad's hand found mine, squeezing with surprising strength. Once she'd departed in a cloud of expensive perfume, he turned to me with unexpected resolution in his eyes. We need to talk about arrangements, he said, when I come home. I was thinking the same thing, I admitted. Connor, Drive Mitchell, recommended we discuss it before discharge. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Smart man, your doctor. He's not my doctor, Dad. Could be, he replied with a mischievous glint that reminded me so much of his pre-stroke self that my throat tightened. He looks at you when you're not watching. Dad, please, I protested, feeling my cheeks warm. We're discussing your living arrangements, not my non-existent love life. He became serious again, adjusting his position in the chair with careful movements that betrayed his ongoing weakness. Jessica won't be living with me, he said decisively. I've decided. The simple statement caught me off guard. Have you discussed this with her? Not yet. Wanted to talk to you first. He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. Need your help. Legally. Separation agreement. Protecting company. Of course, I said automatically, processing the implications. But Dad, are you sure? Recovery is stressful, and major life decisions. Most clarity I've had in years, he interrupted. Stroke showed truth. Jessica married. Healthy, successful me. Not this version, he gestured to himself, frustration briefly crossing his features. Not wrong of her. Just truth. That's not how marriage is supposed to work, I argued gently. For better or worse, in sickness and health, those vows mean something. To some people, he agreed, not to Jessica, always knew, deep down, accepted it, for companionship. He reached for my hand again. But coming home, need peace, support, not performance. In that moment, I understood completely. Dad had always seen Jessica clearly, her ambitions, her limitations, her conditional affection. He'd accepted the terms of their relationship with open eyes, finding it sufficient in a season of his life when loneliness had seemed the greater burden. But now, facing the most significant challenge of his life, those terms no longer served him. He needed authenticity, not appearances. I'll call Greg tomorrow, I promised. We'll make sure everything's handled properly, both personally and for the company. Dad nodded, relief evident in the relaxation of his shoulders. One more thing, he said, his speech growing tired as it often did in the afternoons. Want you to live in guest house, while I recover, if possible with work. The guest house on Dad's property was a beautiful one-bedroom structure overlooking the lake, originally built as Mom's art studio and converted after her death. The request made practical sense for his recovery support, but I hesitated, concerned about maintaining appropriate boundaries. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your independence. The home care service. Not about physical help, he interrupted. About having family close. Real family. His eyes, so like my own, held a vulnerability I rarely saw. Missed too much these past years. Both of us. Too focused on work. Second chance to do better. How could I refuse such a request? Despite the complications it would add to my already overwhelming schedule, despite the painful conversations with Jessica it would necessitate, despite the emotions it would undoubtedly unearth, the answer was clear. I'll move in before you're discharged. I promised. We'll make this work, Dad. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how profoundly everything had changed in just 6 weeks. Dad's stroke had been devastating, yet it had also created space for truths too long ignored. About Jessica's true nature, about our family priorities, about the kind of life we both wanted beyond business success. The power of attorney had given me legal authority to protect Dad's interests. But the real transformation had come from something less tangible. The courage to acknowledge difficult truths and choose authentic connection over comfortable pretense. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. Jessica's reaction to the separation, Dad's ongoing recovery, the delicate balance of professional and personal responsibilities. But for the first time in years, I felt we were moving towards something meaningful, rather than simply maintaining what we'd built. Dad's stroke had revealed what truly mattered, and neither of us was willing to settle for less anymore. Moving into Dad's guest house happened faster than I'd anticipated. Once the decision was made, everything fell into place with surprising ease. My condo sublet to a visiting professor within days, my few cherished possessions transported by the company's maintenance team, my office partially relocated to the guest house's second bedroom to accommodate late-night work sessions without disturbing Dad's rest. The guest house itself was more beautiful than I remembered, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake and mountains beyond. Mom's artistic touch remained in unexpected details: hand-painted drawer pulls in the kitchen, a mosaic backsplash she'd created from broken pottery, reclaimed barn doors separating the living spaces. Being surrounded by these tangible reminders of her creativity soothed something long neglected in my soul. She'd be happy. You're here, Dad said when he visited the space during a weekend pass from rehabilitation, a trial run before his permanent discharge the following week. He ran his hand along the kitchen counter, where Mom had once rolled out pie dough for Sunday dinners. She always hoped you'd use this space someday. I thought this was her studio, I replied, surprised by the revelation. Started that way, he acknowledged. But she designed it, thinking of your future. Said someday, you'd need sanctuary from demands of company. His smile held decades of private memories. She understood. Price of ambition. Wanted you to have retreat. The thought that Mom had created this space with my well-being in mind, even as cancer was taking her from us, brought tears I couldn't suppress. I've been so focused on the business I never took time to appreciate what she built here. Not too late, Dad said simply, his gaze traveling around the sunlit space. Second chances, for both of us. That phrase, second chances, became our mantra in the weeks that followed Dad's homecoming. His discharge from the rehabilitation center marked the beginning of a new chapter, rather than a return to our previous normal. Everything was simultaneously familiar and transformed. The routines of daily business operations now interspersed with therapy appointments and rest periods, our traditional strategy sessions adapted to accommodate Dad's limited stamina, our professional relationship deepened by the intimacy of recovery care. Jessica's reaction to Dad's decision had been precisely what I'd expected: initial disbelief, followed by calculated negotiation. When Greg had presented the separation agreement, her focus had immediately shifted to financial terms, rather than reconciliation efforts. She's not contesting the agreement, Dad informed me one morning as we reviewed quarterly reports on his patio. Just negotiating. Settlement amount. Are you okay with that? I asked, watching him carefully for signs of regret or distress. He shrugged. the movement more fluid after weeks of physical therapy. Expected nothing less. Marriage was always transaction for her. He glanced up from the reports, his expression untroubled. I'm not bitter, Eleanor. We both got what we wanted, for a time. His perspective surprised me with its wisdom and absence of recrimination. Dad wasn't villainizing Jessica or casting himself as victim. He was simply acknowledging the nature of their relationship with clear-eyed acceptance and moving forward accordingly. It was a lesson in dignity I wouldn't soon forget. The company thrived despite, or perhaps because of, our adapted leadership approach. Dad's strategic vision remained sharp as ever, while his forced step back from day-to-day operations gave me space to implement innovations I'd been considering for years. Our complementary strengths created a synergy that energized the entire organization, with board meetings becoming collaborative think tanks rather than status reports. Even the two board members who had initially aligned with Jessica gradually shifted their allegiance as our results spoke for themselves. The Westbrook project finished early and under budget. Our quarterly earnings exceeded projections by 12%, and a high-profile sustainable development contract, one we'd been pursuing for years, finally came through after our presentation to city officials. Your approach sealed the deal, Dad said after the city manager called with the news, emphasizing community integration, not just sustainability. Brilliant angle. The praise warmed me more than I cared to admit. Despite my professional confidence, Dad's approval still mattered deeply. I learned from the best, I replied, not bothering to hide my smile. Remember when you took me to that failed development in Chicago? You showed me how they'd built something environmentally sound but culturally tone-deaf. Buildings are for people, he quoted, a maxim he'd repeated throughout my childhood. Not just for architects' portfolios. Our professional rhythm found its counterpart in our personal lives as well. Mornings began with coffee on Dad's terrace, watching the sun rise over the lake as we discussed the day ahead. Evenings often ended with dinner together, sometimes prepared by the part-time housekeeper who assisted with Dad's care, sometimes ordered in after long days, sometimes my own inexpert attempts at recreating Mom's recipes from her handwritten cards. Connor became a regular presence in our lives, initially through Dad's outpatient therapy sessions but increasingly through social connections as well. When he mentioned his love of sailing during a therapy appointment, Dad immediately invited him to take out the small sailboat that had been sitting unused at our dock since the stroke. Can't handle the sheets with this hand yet, Dad explained, demonstrating his still weakened grip. Eleanor used to sail with me, but hasn't had time in years. I'd be happy to take you both out, Connor offered, his expression brightening at the prospect. The lake is perfect this time of year. That first sailing excursion led to others, which led to impromptu dinners at the house, which led to Connor helping with projects around the property. The kind of tasks that had once been Dad's domain, but now exceeded his physical capabilities. You don't need to do all this, I protested one Saturday as Connor replaced rotted boards on the dock, his t-shirt damp with exertion. We can hire someone. I enjoy working with my hands, he replied, driving another nail with practiced ease. Balances out all the time I spend on paperwork and treatment plans. He glanced up, squinting against the sun. Besides, your father's fishing stories alone are worth the manual labor. Did he really catch a 30-pound pike from this dock? 35 pounds, I corrected with a laugh. And yes, though the fish gets bigger every time he tells the story. I heard that. Dad called from his chair on the lawn where he was supposedly resting but actually supervising Connor's work. Disrespect from my own daughter. The easy camaraderie between the three of us felt both novel and natural, as if we'd stumbled into a configuration that somehow balanced all our separate strengths and compensated for our individual weaknesses. Dad's wisdom and strategic thinking, Connor's practical problem-solving and compassionate insight, my organizational skills and determination. Together, we created a functioning ecosystem of support and growth. By the 3-month mark after Dad's discharge, his progress had plateaued at what Connor called his new normal, about 85% of his pre-stroke functionality, with lingering weakness in his right hand and occasional word-finding difficulties during times of stress or fatigue. He'd accepted these limitations with characteristic pragmatism, adapting his routines and focusing on what he could still do exceptionally well. Some things harder now, he acknowledged during one of his follow-up appointments with Connor, but clarity about priorities better than ever. This clarity extended to the company's direction as well. Dad began advocating for a reassessment of our corporate values and long-term vision, a process he'd resisted before the stroke when I'd suggested it might be time for an update. Walsh Construction, more than buildings now, he explained during a strategic planning session with our executive team, need to articulate broader mission, community impact, environmental responsibility, legacy beyond profit. The executive team responded with enthusiasm, energized by his vision and my practical implementation plans. Over several intensive weeks, we collaboratively redefined our mission statement, corporate values, and 10-year strategic plan, a process that united the leadership team in ways I hadn't anticipated. Through it all, Jessica remained peripherally involved in our lives through the ongoing separation negotiations and occasional social appearances where our paths crossed. She'd taken to presenting herself as the stoic, supportive, almost ex-wife, a narrative that played well in her social circles but rang hollow to those who knew the truth. Jessica asked about company's sustainability initiative at charity lunch yesterday. Dad mentioned one evening as we reviewed project timelines on his patio. Seemed genuinely interested in our progress. That's surprising, I replied, not bothering to hide my skepticism. Environmental issues weren't exactly her passion before. Dad's expression turned thoughtful. People can change, perspectives, even Jessica. Are you having second thoughts about the separation? I asked, studying his face for signs of uncertainty. No, he said firmly. Right decision, for both of us, but doesn't mean can't be civil, even friendly, eventually. His capacity for forgiveness without compromising his boundaries continued to impress and challenge me. While I struggled to release my resentment toward Jessica for her abandonment during crisis, Dad seemed to have transcended bitterness entirely, viewing their relationship as a closed chapter rather than an ongoing source of pain. How do you do it? I asked him later that week as we watched the sunset from Adirondack chairs on the lawn. How do you not resent her for walking away when you needed her most? He considered the question carefully, taking time to organize his thoughts as he often did now before speaking. Resentment uses energy. I need elsewhere, he said finally. Jessica behaved according to her nature. Disappointment? Natural. Bitterness? Choice. That's a pretty enlightened perspective, I observed, wondering if I could ever achieve such emotional maturity. Stroke perspective, he corrected with a wry smile. Nothing like near death, to clarify thinking. The conversation might have ended there, but Dad surprised me by continuing, his words measured but deliberate. Been meaning to ask. About you and Connor. I felt heat rise in my cheeks despite my attempts at nonchalance. There's nothing to ask about. He's your doctor and has become a friend. More than that, I think. Dad persisted gently. Way he looks at you. Way you respond. Chemistry. Obvious to everyone. Dad, please, I protested. Even if there were something, it would be inappropriate while he's still overseeing your care. And I'm focused on the company and your recovery right now. It's not the right time for complications. Dad's laugh held genuine amusement. Life is complications, Eleanor. Always wrong time if you're waiting for perfect circumstances. He reached over to pat my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Your mother and I started company while expecting you. No perfect timing for important things. His words lingered with me over the following days, surfacing unexpectedly during budget meetings and project reviews, distracting me during my morning runs along the lakeshore, keeping me awake as I listened to the water lapping against the dock outside my window. Was there something between Connor and me beyond friendship and professional respect? The question felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. At 32, I'd convinced myself that romantic fulfillment was a secondary priority at best, something to consider someday after the company was secure. after Dad's health stabilized, after all the responsible boxes were checked. But what if someday never arrived? What if life continued presenting valid reasons to postpone personal happiness indefinitely? Dad's stroke had demonstrated with brutal clarity how quickly circumstances could change, how tomorrow's carefully laid plans could dissolve in a single moment of crisis. The opportunity to explore these questions arrived unexpectedly the following week, when Connor appeared at the house for Dad's therapy session, only to find him engaged in an urgent video conference with a major client. The Shanghai team had questions about structural modifications. I explained apologetically in the foyer. It couldn't wait if we want to maintain the construction timeline. He shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. No problem, Connor replied easily. I can adjust the session accordingly. Mind if I wait on the dock? It's a perfect morning for it. I hesitated, then made a decision. Actually, I was about to take the kayak out. Would you like to join me? There's a second one in the boathouse. His smile was immediate and warming. I'd love that. Lead the way. 20 minutes later, we were paddling across the glass-like surface of the lake, morning mist still clinging to the distant shoreline. The rhythmic motion of paddling created a meditative space, the silence between us comfortable rather than awkward. Your father is doing remarkably well, Connor said as we paused to drift in a small cove. His recovery trajectory has exceeded all my initial expectations. He's always been stubbornly determined, I replied, trailing my fingers through the cool water. Mom used to say he was the most gently immovable person she'd ever met. That's a perfect description, Connor laughed. I'm seeing that same quality in you, by the way. Stubbornness? Gentle determination, he corrected. The way you've balanced the company leadership with your father's care. The way you've created space for his recovery without diminishing his dignity. It's impressive. The compliment caught me off guard, warming me from within. I've just done what needed doing, I said, uncomfortable with praise for what felt like basic responsibility. That's exactly what I mean, Connor replied, his kayak drifting closer to mine. You see the necessary path and follow it without drama or complaint, regardless of personal cost. It's a rare quality. Something in his tone made me look up, meeting his gaze directly. The intensity I found there stirred butterflies. I'd thought long dormant. Connor, I began hesitantly. I should probably say something about professional boundaries. You're still Dad's doctor, and I wouldn't want to compromise. I've been thinking about that too, he interrupted gently, which is why I've arranged for Dr. Levine to take over your father's outpatient care starting next month. She's exceptional, actually more specialized in long-term stroke recovery than I am. You're transferring Dad's case? I asked, surprised by the unexpected development. I submitted the paperwork last week, he confirmed. Not because of this, he gestured between us, but because it's the right time medically. Your father's needs now are maintenance-focused, rather than acute rehabilitation. And yes, I'll admit the potential conflict of interest was a consideration. Potential conflict of interest, I repeated, a smile tugging at my lips despite my attempt at seriousness. That sounds very professional. I can be very professional, he replied, his own smile breaking through. Until I can't be anymore. And when might that be? I asked, heart suddenly racing. I was thinking, dinner, Friday night. Not at your house, not as your father's doctor. Just Connor and Eleanor, seeing where this might lead. The simplicity of the invitation, stripped of complications and pretenses, felt like a breath of fresh air after years of calculated corporate maneuvering and complex family dynamics. I like that, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the flutter in my chest. As we paddled back toward the dock, I felt a sense of possibilities opening before me. Not just with Connor, though that potential relationship stirred excitement I'd long suppressed, but in all aspects of life. Dad's recovery had forced me to reevaluate priorities, to recognize that professional success without personal fulfillment created an unbalanced existence. That evening, reviewing financial projections in the guest house, I found myself repeatedly distracted by thoughts of the upcoming dinner with Connor. The spreadsheets before me, once the focus of my complete attention, now seemed like just one component of a much richer life mosaic. My phone buzzed with a text from Greg, our attorney. Final settlement terms accepted by Jessica's team. Papers ready for signatures tomorrow. Congratulations on resolution. I stared at the message, absorbing its significance. The legal battle that had begun in the hospital cafeteria nearly 6 months earlier was ending not with dramatic confrontation, but with signatures on documents. Jessica would receive her negotiated settlement. Dad would retain control of the company and all major assets. The board would continue under our leadership without further challenges. The power of attorney that had started this journey would soon become a historical document rather than an active shield. I forwarded the message to Dad with a simple addition. It's finally over. You're free. His reply came moments later. We both are. Those 3 words captured everything. Acknowledgement of how Jessica's influence had constrained us both, recognition of the journey we'd traveled together through recovery and reorganization, celebration of the new balance we'd found between business ambition and personal fulfillment. The following morning, Dad and I met Greg at his office to sign the final separation papers. Jessica had already completed her portion, opting to handle her signatures privately rather than face us directly. Once these are filed, Greg explained, sliding the documents across his polished desk, the separation becomes legally binding. The financial transfers will process automatically according to the agreed schedule. After the 6-month waiting period, either party can file for divorce. Dad signed each flagged page with deliberate care, his handwriting still slightly shakier than before but entirely legible. As he completed the final signature, he sat back with an expression of peaceful resolution rather than triumph or regret. Next chapter begins now, he said simply, returning the pen to its holder. On our drive back to the house, Dad surprised me by asking to stop at the lakeside park where he'd taught me to skip stones as a child. The autumn day was perfect, crisp air, sunlight dancing on water, maple trees blazing with color along the shoreline. We walked slowly to the water's edge, Dad's cane providing stability on the uneven ground. Want to show you something, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew an envelope similar to the one that had contained the power of attorney documents months earlier. Been working on this since coming home from rehab. I accepted the envelope with curiosity, opening it to find legal papers with the heading Walsh Construction Leadership Transition Plan. Scanning the document, I realized it outlined a 3-year process for Dad to step down as CEO and transfer leadership to me, while retaining his role as chairman of the board. Dad? I breathed, looking up from the papers. Are you sure about this? He nodded, his expression serene. Never been more certain of anything. Company needs your vision now. My role should evolve. Partnership, not hierarchy. But your health is improving. I protested. You don't need to step back if you're not ready. Not about health, he replied firmly. About right timing for company's future. About recognizing your leadership capabilities. About balance in both our lives. As we stood by the water's edge, the implications of his decision expanded in my mind. Not just professional advancement, but recognition of how profoundly our relationship had evolved through crisis. Dad wasn't relinquishing control. He was acknowledging a partnership that had proven its strength through the most challenging circumstances imaginable. I don't know what to say, I admitted, emotion making my voice unsteady. Say you'll accept CEO position. He replied with a gentle smile. Say you'll continue our legacy. Say you'll remember to live fully, not just work relentlessly. I accept, I said, returning his smile through tears. All of those conditions. He nodded, satisfied, then reached down with effort to select a smooth stone from the shoreline. With his left hand, now his dominant one since the stroke, he demonstrated the wrist flick he'd taught me 3 decades earlier. The stone skipped 5 times across the lake's surface before disappearing beneath the waters. Still got it, he said with quiet pride. You certainly do, I agreed, selecting my own stone. Mine skipped only 3 times, making him chuckle. Always were, impatient with technique, he teased. Too eager for results. The observation hit closer to home than he could know, reflecting not just my stone-skipping style, but my approach to life itself, always rushing toward the next achievement, the next milestone, rarely pausing to appreciate the journey. Dad's stroke had forced that pause, creating space for reflection and recalibration that might never have happened otherwise. As we walked back to the car, Dad leaning slightly on my arm when the path grew steeper, I felt profound gratitude for this unexpected second chance, not just at a closer relationship with my father, but at a more intentionally balanced life for us both. 6 months after Dad's stroke, Walsh Construction celebrated its 30th anniversary with a gala event that doubled as the official announcement of our leadership transition plan. The evening highlighted both our company's past achievements and future vision, with Dad and I presenting jointly to an audience of employees, clients, and community partners. Dad's speech, delivered with the measured cadence that now characterized his communication, received a standing ovation for its wisdom and heartfelt acknowledgement of the team's contributions throughout the company's history. My presentation on our vision for the next decade, emphasizing community impact, environmental leadership, and organizational culture, generated palpable excitement among the attendees. Jessica attended as a courtesy, maintaining the public narrative of an amicable separation. She circulated briefly among guests before making an early departure, her role in our story diminishing with each passing month. Dad watched her go without regret, his attention quickly returning to conversations with longtime employees about their families and shared memories. Connor accompanied me to the event, our relationship having developed steadily since that conversation on the lake. His presence at my side throughout the evening felt like a natural extension of the balance I was learning to create between professional ambition and personal fulfillment. "Proud of you," Dad murmured as we shared a quiet moment at the end of the evening, the last guest departing into the night. "Would have been easier path to maintain status quo. Takes courage to evolve." "I learned from the best," I replied, squeezing his hand. "You showed me how to face change with grace, even when it arrives uninvited." He smiled, a hint of mischief returning to his eyes. "Speaking of change," noticed Connor caught the CFO position announcement earlier. Seemed very interested in details of company housing benefit. "Dad," I protested, feeling warmth rise in my cheeks. "We've only been dating 3 months." "Just observing," he replied innocently. "Man listens carefully when housing mentioned. Natural progression of serious intentions." Despite my embarrassment, I couldn't help laughing at his transparent matchmaking. "One major life change at a time, please. Let me adjust to the CEO role before you start planning wedding venues." The journey from that terrible morning in the hospital to this moment of celebration and possibility hadn't been linear or easy. The power of attorney that had initially seemed like merely a legal safeguard had become the catalyst for profound transformation, not just in our business structure, but in our fundamental approach to life's priorities. Dad's stroke had revealed harsh truths about Jessica's conditional commitment, while simultaneously deepening the authentic bonds between father and daughter. The crisis that might have destroyed our family and company had instead burned away pretense and distraction, leaving only what truly mattered: genuine connection, meaningful work, and the courage to embrace change rather than fear it. As we walked together toward the waiting car, Dad's pace slower but his spirit stronger than ever, I reflected on how completely our story had defied the expected narrative. Instead of tragedy leading to loss and diminishment, our path had twisted toward unexpected renewal and expansion. The power of attorney had protected Dad's legal interests, yes, but the true power had emerged from our willingness to rewrite the story we'd been living, to challenge assumptions about success and fulfillment, to recognize that strength sometimes arrives disguised as vulnerability. "Ready for tomorrow?" Dad asked as we settled into the back seat. The question encompassed everything: the official transition announcement to employees, the board meeting to formalize our new roles, the beginning of our next chapter as business partners with redefined responsibilities. "More than ready," I replied with certainty, born of all we'd navigated together. "Whatever comes next, we've got this." His smile held the wisdom that only confronting mortality can bring, that perfect balance of acceptance and determination that had guided his recovery and would now shape our shared future. "Yes," he agreed simply, "we certainly do. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.